What happens when America's most trusted morning show host decides to break her own rules of diplomacy? You won't believe what unfolds when Robin Roberts abandons her trademark warmth and unleashes a barrage of accusations that left her guests speechless and viewers around the world questioning everything they thought they knew about one of the most controversial figures in modern celebrity culture. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when the gloves come off and years of simmering tension finally explode into the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. Last night's episode of Good Morning America was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated publicity appearance, but what viewers witnessed instead was a masterclass in how quickly a controlled environment can spiral into chaos. The guest arrived with her usual entourage, designer outfit perfectly pressed, media-trained responses at the ready. But Robin Roberts had clearly decided that this morning would be different. Sources backstage reported that Roberts had been unusually quiet during her pre-show preparation, reviewing notes with an intensity that made her production team nervous. The tension was palpable from the moment the camera started rolling. Roberts' opening was deceptively normal, her voice carrying that familiar maternal warmth that had made her America's morning confidant for decades. "We're joined now by someone who certainly needs no introduction," she began. But there was something in her eyes that suggested this wouldn't be the softball interview everyone expected. The guest settled into her chair with practiced grace, flashing that megawatt smile that had launched 1,000 magazine covers, completely unaware that she was walking into what would become the most brutal 10 minutes of live television in recent memory. "Thank you for having me, Robin. It's always such a pleasure," came the response, delivered with that carefully modulated tone that screamed media training. But Roberts wasn't interested in pleasantries this morning. She cut straight through the diplomatic niceties with surgical precision. "Let's talk about authenticity," Roberts said, leaning forward slightly, "because I think our viewers deserve to know when they're being sold a carefully constructed narrative versus the actual truth." The smile on her guest's face flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that revealed the first crack in the armor. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "Robin, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible with the public." The defensive note creeping into her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Roberts pulled out a tablet, her movements deliberate and calculated. "Really? Because I have some information here that suggests your definition of honesty might be quite different from what most people would consider truthful." The studio fell silent except for the soft hum of the cameras. Even the crew members who had seen thousands of interviews seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. "I think there might be some misunderstanding," the guest replied, but her composure was beginning to show hairline fractures. Her hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, were now gripping the armrests of her chair. "No misunderstanding at all," Roberts countered, her voice gaining strength. "I'm talking about the pattern of inconsistencies that seem to follow you everywhere you go. The stories that change depending on your audience, the convenient omissions when the truth doesn't serve your narrative." Each word was delivered with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. The guest's carefully maintained facade was starting to show serious strain. Her media handler, sitting just out of camera range, was making subtle gestures, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break or some kind of intervention. But Roberts was in complete control of her show, and she had no intention of letting her target escape so easily. "Robin, I think you're being unfair," came the response. But the voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I've always done my best to serve others and use my platform for good. Have you?" Roberts shot back immediately. "Because the information I have suggests that your version of serving others looks remarkably similar to serving yourself." The gloves were officially off now, and everyone in the studio could feel it. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was an interrogation. The guest shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfect posture beginning to crack. I don't know what you think you know, but I can assure you that any allegations against my character are completely unfounded. The words sounded rehearsed, like a lawyer's prepared statement, which only seemed to fuel Roberts's determination to dig deeper. Unfounded? Roberts repeated, her eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief. That's interesting because I have documentation right here that tells a very different story. Would you like me to share some specifics with our viewers? The threat hung in the air like a sword of Damocles, and everyone could see that the guest was calculating her options, trying to figure out how much Roberts actually knew versus how much she was bluffing. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. The guest's breathing had become slightly more rapid, and a faint sheen of perspiration was beginning to show despite the studio's air conditioning. This was live television at its most raw and unpredictable, the kind of moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. I think we should move on to discussing my charitable work, the guest finally said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. But Roberts wasn't having it. Oh, we'll definitely be discussing your charitable work, Roberts replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In fact, that's exactly where I was hoping this conversation would go. The ominous tone in her voice made it clear that this wasn't going to be the positive pivot the guest had hoped for. And the realization was starting to dawn that she might have walked into something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The guest's public relations team, watching from the green room, were frantically making phone calls and gesturing wildly at the monitors. They had prepared for tough questions about personal life, about royal protocols, about media criticism. But this surgical dismantling of carefully constructed narratives was something entirely different. Roberts had clearly done her homework, and she was armed with information that could destroy years of reputation management in a matter of minutes. Let's start with your foundation, Roberts continued, consulting her notes with the thoroughness of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, the one that claims to empower women and support communities in need. According to the financial documents I've obtained, less than 5% of the donations actually reach the people you claim to be helping. Where exactly is that money going? The color drained from the guest's face so rapidly that the makeup artist in the wings actually took a step forward, thinking she might need medical attention. This wasn't just an accusation. It was a direct assault on the cornerstone of her public persona. The foundation had been her shield, her proof of purpose, her answer to every criticism about privilege and disconnection from real-world struggles. Those numbers are taken completely out of context, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Running a charitable organization requires significant operational costs, staff salaries, administrative expenses. Anyone who understands nonprofit work would know that. Roberts leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from confrontational to almost pitying. Administrative expenses. Is that what you call the $100,000 speaking fees you pay yourself for appearances at your own charity events? The luxury travel accommodations charged to the foundation account? The designer wardrobe purchases justified as professional representation costs? The studio audience, which had been respectfully quiet up until this point, began to murmur. These weren't vague accusations or tabloid rumors. These were specific financial details that suggested access to official documentation. The guest's hands were now visibly shaking, and she kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating whether she could make a graceful escape. "I think you're misinterpreting the information," she said weakly, but even she seemed to realize how hollow that sounded. "My team handles all the financial aspects of the foundation. I focus on the mission and the message." "The mission and the message," Roberts repeated slowly, savoring each word. "Let's talk about that message because I have video footage here of you giving a speech about income inequality, and the struggles of working families while wearing a bracelet that costs more than most people make in 5 years. Do you see the disconnect there? The guest's composure finally cracked completely. "You're ambushing me," she said, her voice rising to an almost shrill pitch. "This isn't journalism. This is a character assassination. I came here in good faith to discuss my work and my projects, and you're attacking me with information taken out of context and twisted to fit some predetermined narrative." Roberts's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed energized by her guest's desperation. "Character assassination? I'm simply asking you to explain the discrepancies between your public statements and your documented actions. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to do?" "This is harassment," the guest shot back, her media training completely abandoned now. "You're using your platform to bully me with selective information and biased interpretations. My charitable work has helped thousands of people regardless of what your so-called documentation says. Thousands of people." Roberts's voice carried a note of genuine incredulity. "Because according to these records, your foundation has directly assisted exactly 47 individuals over the past 3 years, while spending over $2 million on operational expenses. That's roughly $42,000 per person helped. Would you like to explain how that constitutes effective charity work?" The mathematics were devastating, laid out with brutal clarity that made any defense seem pathetic. The guest was trapped between admitting to mismanagement or acknowledging deliberate deception, neither of which offered any path to salvaging the situation. "You don't understand the complexities involved," she said desperately. "Creating sustainable change requires infrastructure, requires planning, requires resources that don't show up in your oversimplified analysis." Roberts set down her tablet and looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewers at home. "I think our audience is smart enough to understand that when someone raises millions of dollars claiming to help people in need, those people should actually receive help, not $42,000 worth of help per person." The studio had fallen completely silent now, except for the mechanical sounds of the cameras and the barely audible whispers of crew members communicating through their headsets. Everyone could sense that they were witnessing something unprecedented, complete breakdown of the carefully maintained boundaries between public persona and private reality. "Don't have to sit here and listen to this," the guest said, but she remained in her chair, perhaps understanding that walking away would only confirm every accusation being leveled against her. "No, you don't," Roberts agreed calmly. "But I think you owe it to the people who donated to your foundation, believing they were helping others. Don't you think they deserve to know where their money actually went?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The guest's face had gone from pale to almost green, and beads of sweat were now visible on her forehead, despite the studio's controlled temperature. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and for a moment, it seemed like she might actually faint on live television. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every telltale sign of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. "You have no right," she whispered. But her voice carried no authority anymore. It was the sound of someone who had run out of options, out of deflections, out of escape routes. "You have no right to destroy someone's life based on incomplete information and your own personal agenda." Roberts leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, but carrying perfectly through the studio microphones. "Personal agenda? My only agenda is the truth. And the truth is that you've built your entire public persona on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and exploitation of people's genuine desire to help others." The guest suddenly stood up, her chair rolling backward with such force that it nearly toppled over. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot, causing several crew members to jump. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and her entire body was trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "I will not sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly has a vendetta against me," she declared, her voice now carrying a hysterical edge that made her sound unhinged rather than dignified. "This is not journalism. This is a public execution, and I refuse to participate in it any longer." But Roberts wasn't finished. She remained seated, projecting an aura of calm control that made her guest's emotional breakdown look even more damaging by comparison. "A vendetta? I'm simply reading from publicly available financial documents. If that feels like an attack, perhaps you should ask yourself why the truth about your own actions feels so threatening." The guests screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of media training or public decorum. "How did you even get access to them? This is illegal. This is harassment." "These are the same documents your organization filed with the IRS," Roberts interrupted smoothly. "Public record, available to anyone who bothers to look. The real question is why you thought no one would ever bother to examine how you spend other people's charitable donations." The guest's security detail, who had been standing quietly near the studio entrance, began moving toward the set. They could see that their client was having a complete meltdown and needed to be extracted before she said something that would make the situation even worse. But she was beyond listening to anyone now, caught in a spiral of rage and humiliation that had taken on a life of its own. "You think you're so righteous?" she snarled at Roberts, pointing an accusatory finger that shook with fury. "Sitting there in judgment of me while you collect your millions from this network. At least I try to help people. At least I use my platform for something meaningful instead of just gossiping about other people's lives." Roberts' expression shifted slightly, and for the first time in the interview, she looked genuinely offended. "Help people? You've raised over $6 million in the name of helping people and spent less than $300,000 actually helping anyone. The rest went to fund your lifestyle, your travel, your designer clothes, and your inflated sense of self-importance." "That's not true," the guest shrieked. But even as the words left her mouth, she seemed to realize how desperate and unconvincing she sounded. "You don't understand the complexities of running a global charitable organization. You don't understand the costs involved in creating real change. I understand that when people donate money to feed hungry children, they expect that money to actually feed hungry children," Roberts replied with devastating simplicity. "Not to pay for your private jet flights to charity galas where you give speeches about poverty." The guest's security team had reached the edge of the set now, making urgent hand signals to get her attention. Her publicist was frantically waving from the wings, clearly wanting her to stop talking and leave immediately. But she was too far gone to think strategically anymore. "I have done more good in this world than you could ever understand," she declared, her voice cracking with emotion. "I have brought attention to important causes. I have raised awareness about issues that matter, that has value that can't be measured in your narrow, petty accounting." Roberts stood up slowly, matching her guest's theatrical gesture, but maintaining her composure. "Raising awareness. Is that what you call it when you pose for photo opportunities with underprivileged children, and then use those photos to solicit donations that you spend on yourself? Is that awareness or exploitation?" The word exploitation seemed to hit the guest like a physical blow. She staggered backward slightly, her face contorting with rage and something that looked almost like genuine pain. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and viewers could see something raw and desperate underneath all the carefully constructed public persona. "I'm done," she said suddenly, her voice hollow and defeated. "I'm done with this ambush. I'm done with your lies, and I'm done pretending that this is legitimate television." She began walking toward the exit, her high heels clicking against the studio floor with sharp staccato beats that punctuated the finality of her decision. But Roberts wasn't quite ready to let her go. "Before you leave," she called out, causing the guest to pause at the edge of the set. "Don't you think you owe an apology to the donors who trusted you? To the people who believed in your mission and gave their hard-earned money, expecting it to help others?" The guest turned around slowly, And the expression on her face was unlike anything viewers had ever seen from her before. It was pure, undiluted hatred, mixed with the kind of desperation that comes from being completely cornered with no way out. "I owe nothing to anyone," she said, venom dripping from every word. "Especially not to people who are too stupid to understand the bigger picture of what I'm trying to accomplish in this world." And with that final devastating self-revelation, she turned and walked off the set, her security team falling in behind her as she disappeared through the studio exit. The sound of the heavy door slamming echoed through the studio like the final note of a tragic symphony. Roberts turned back to face the camera, her composure intact but her expression serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was supposed to be a conversation about charitable work and public service. I think our viewers can draw their own conclusions about what they just witnessed."